I was lying on a cold gymnasium floor in my graduation gown when I heard a nurse say they were calling my family. I remember thinking, finally, they will come. I had worked 4 years for that day. 4 years of double shifts, cheap noodles, and studying until my eyes burned. I had saved them front row seats. I had texted my mother the time 3 separate times that week. But when I woke up fully and looked around that small hospital room, there was only one face I recognized. It was not my mother. It was not my father. It was my grandfather, still wearing his garden boots, mud on the side of his left heel, eyes red like he had been crying the whole drive over. He was holding my hand so tightly I could feel his pulse in my fingers. And when I asked him where everyone else was, he looked out the window for a long moment before he looked back at me. And what he said next was the sentence that finally broke something loose inside me that I had been holding together for years. Before I tell you what my grandfather said that day, I want to ask you something honest. Think about the people in your life who were supposed to show up for your most important moments. Did they? Because Emily's story is not just about one missed graduation. It is about a pattern that took her years to finally name out loud. If you have ever been the dependable one, the quiet one, the one who holds everything together while other people get the applause, stay with this story. It was made for you. My name is Emily. I was 22 years old on the day I graduated from Northfield University with a degree in accounting. I had paid for every single semester myself, not with help from my parents, not with a fund my family had saved, not with a gift or a loan from anyone who loved me. I had worked at a hotel front desk from my freshman year to my senior year, picking up weekend shifts and holiday shifts and any shift that nobody else wanted. I had applied for every scholarship I could find. I had lived in the cheapest off-campus housing I could afford, sharing a 2-bedroom apartment with 3 other women, and sleeping on a mattress I bought secondhand for $40. I had done all of that, and I had done it without complaint, and I had done it because I believed that the day I walked across that stage would be worth every single hard thing I had carried to get there. I want you to understand something important before I go further. I did not come from a family that could not afford to help me. My father ran a successful landscaping company that had been growing for nearly a decade. My mother worked part-time at a medical billing office and spent the rest of her time at the baseball field watching my younger brother Marcus practice, travel, and compete. We were not rich, but we were comfortable. There was money for Marcus's equipment, his travel league fees, his private coaching sessions, his new cleats every season. There was always money for Marcus. For me, there was encouragement to figure it out on my own because, as my mother said more than once, Emily is so capable, she does not really need our help the way Marcus does. I had heard that sentence in different forms my entire life. Emily is the strong one. Emily handles things. Emily does not make a fuss. Emily will be fine. I had been told I was fine so many times that I had stopped checking whether I actually was. I just kept moving forward, kept working, kept being fine, because that was the role that had been written for me in my family long before I was old enough to understand what a role even was. Marcus was 3 years younger than me. He was talented at baseball, genuinely, and I never resented his talent. What I resented, though I could not fully name it for years, was the way his talent had become the center of gravity for our entire family. Every vacation was scheduled around his tournaments. Every dinner conversation eventually drifted to his stats, or his prospects, or the coach who had noticed him. My parents had gone to 47 of his games in a single year. I know the number because I counted once, not out of bitterness, but because I was trying to understand the shape of a thing I was feeling and could not yet put into words. I had invited my parents to my university 4 times across 4 years, a freshman orientation event where families were welcome, a scholarship award ceremony where I received the Hartwell Academic Excellence Award in front of a small auditorium, a presentation I gave in my junior year for a business case competition my team won, and graduation. They had attended none of the first 3. For the orientation, my father had a big landscaping contract that weekend. For the scholarship ceremony, Marcus had a tournament in another city, and my mother said she simply could not miss it. For the competition, my father said he would try to make it, but something came up and he never came. Each time, I said it was fine. Each time, they believed me because that was what we had all agreed I would say. But graduation was different. Graduation was the end. Graduation was the proof of everything I had worked for and sacrificed and carried alone. I told them 6 weeks in advance. I mailed them a formal invitation, handmade, with the date and the time and the venue printed clearly. I texted my mother the information again 3 weeks out, 2 weeks out, and the morning of the ceremony. I saved them 2 seats in the front family section by arriving at the venue 2 hours early and placing a small handwritten card on each seat that said reserved for the Calloway family. I had even arranged for a friend to video the moment I walked across the stage in case the live view was obstructed. I had thought of everything. I had prepared for everything. The only thing I had not prepared for was the truth of what their absence would feel like when I finally had no way to pretend otherwise. The ceremony was held in the Northfield University Event Center, a large gymnasium that had been dressed up with banners and chairs and a temporary stage. It seated about 3,000 people. I had arrived early and set up those 2 seats and then gone backstage with the other graduates to line up alphabetically. I kept checking my phone. My mother had not replied to my morning text. My father had not replied either. I told myself they were probably already on the road. I told myself they were probably parking. I told myself a lot of things in that backstage hallway while wearing my gown and holding my cap in my hands. When the procession started and we walked out into the main hall, I scanned the crowd immediately. The seats I had saved were in the 3rd row, near the left aisle, easily visible from the stage. I had memorized the location precisely. I found them with my eyes before I had taken more than 20 steps into the room. They were empty. Both of them. The little handwritten cards I had placed were still sitting there, undisturbed, like small white flags of surrender that nobody had bothered to collect. I kept walking. I found my assigned seat with the other graduates. I sat down. The dean began speaking. I looked at those 2 empty seats twice more, and then I made myself stop looking. I was going to be present for my own graduation, even if nobody who was supposed to love me had shown up to witness it. I had earned that stage, and I was going to walk across it with my head straight, and I was going to shake the dean's hand, and I was going to smile, and I was going to mean it, because the degree was real regardless of who was watching. I was 4 rows from the front when the dizziness started. I thought at first it was nerves or the heat of the room. The event center was packed and warm and the stage lights were bright. I had eaten only a small breakfast that morning because I had been too anxious to eat properly. I had also been awake since 4 in the morning because I could not sleep. I pressed my feet flat against the floor and tried to breathe slowly and told myself I was fine. That word again. Fine. I was not fine. When they called the C names and I stood to join the line moving toward the stage steps, the room tilted. I remember the sound changing, going slightly distant and hollow, like I had put my head underwater. I remember the feel of the carpet under my shoes. I remember the back of the gown belonging to the graduate in front of me, a dark navy fabric with a yellow honor cord. And then I remember the floor rushing toward me with a speed that made no sense, and then I remember nothing at all. I was told later by my friend Priya, who had been sitting in the general audience section, that I collapsed on the steps leading up to the stage. She said it was not dramatic in the Hollywood sense. I simply went down, quietly and completely, like someone had turned off a switch. Several people nearby helped immediately. A faculty member who had medical training kept me stable until campus paramedics arrived. Priya said she ran to the side of the venue and was in tears before I had even been moved. The ceremony paused briefly. I was carried out on a stretcher and taken to a small medical room adjacent to the venue while an ambulance was called as a precaution. At the medical room, they established that I had fainted due to a combination of low blood sugar, dehydration, sleep deprivation, and acute stress. Nothing life-threatening. Nothing requiring hospitalization beyond observation. But the campus nurse, following standard protocol, asked me for my emergency contact. I gave my mother's name and number. The nurse stepped away and called. My mother did not answer. The nurse tried my father's number, which I provided next. My father did not answer either. There was a 3rd number on my emergency contact form, one I had added during my freshman year almost as an afterthought. My grandfather, Harold Calloway, my father's father. He was 68 years old, lived 40 minutes fro. M campus and had a flip phone he sometimes forgot to charge, but he answered. He answered on the 2nd ring, and according to the nurse, he asked only 2 questions. He asked if I was breathing, and he asked for the exact address. Then he hung up and drove straight there. He arrived before the ambulance had even left. He walked into that medical room in his gardening clothes, still smelling like soil and cut grass, and when he saw me sitting upright on the exam table with a blood pressure cuff on my arm, he stopped in the doorway and put one hand flat against the doorframe like he needed it to hold himself steady. Then he crossed the room and sat beside me and took my hand, and he did not say anything for a while. He just held my hand. And that silence, from a man who had shown up when nobody else had, was the loudest thing I had heard all day. When I asked him where my parents were, he did not answer immediately. He looked at the wall. He pressed his lips together. Then he looked back at me and he said, quietly and directly, the way he always spoke, "Marcus had a regional qualifier today, M. They went to his game. I told them they should come here instead. Your father said you would understand." I would understand. I sat there in my graduation gown with the cap still clutched in one hand and a hospital identification bracelet on my wrist, and I thought about those 4 words. Your father said you would understand. I thought about how many times across my entire life I had been given that gift without ever asking for it. The gift of being the one who understands, the one who does not need anything, the one who can be skipped and overlooked and counted on not to make it difficult for everyone else. My grandfather watched my face while I processed that. He was a quiet man by nature, not the kind who filled silences with noise. But after a moment, he said something I have never forgotten. He said, "For the record, I am not proud of my son today. And I want you to know that I drove here because I would have driven twice as far, and I am only sorry I was not in that room when your name was called." I started crying then. Not loudly. Just tears running down my face in a steady, quiet way, the way they do when something releases that you have been holding tightly for much longer than you realized. My grandfather did not tell me to stop or tell me it was okay or tell me everything would work out. He just sat there with me, holding my hand, being present in the way that the 2 most important people in my life had not managed to be. That was the beginning. Not the beginning of the hurt, which had been building for years in ways I had not let myself fully feel, but the beginning of the end of my silence about it. I was discharged from the medical observation within 2 hours. My grandfather drove me back to my apartment. He stopped at a diner on the way and insisted on buying me a full meal, the biggest thing on the menu, eggs and toast and orange juice and a bowl of oatmeal, and he sat across from me and watched me eat with an expression that mixed relief with something heavier. When I thanked him for coming, he waved his hand and said that was not something that required thanks. He said showing up for the people you love is not a favor. It is just what you do. I thought about that sentence the entire rest of the evening. My mother called at 6:47 that night, not to ask where I was or what had happened or why I had not answered my phone. She called to tell me that Marcus had done beautifully at the qualifier and that they were so proud of him, and that she was sorry she had missed graduation, but she knew I would understand, and also had anyone taken pictures because she would love to see them. She did not know I had collapsed. She did not know an ambulance had been called. She did not know that I had spent part of my graduation day in a medical room with a stranger's blood pressure cuff on my arm while my grandfather drove 40 minutes in garden clothes to hold my hand. She did not know any of this because she had not been there, and she had not called to check in, and she had simply assumed that everything was fine because Emily was always fine. I told her what had happened. I told her calmly and clearly, without dramatics, just the facts in order. I had fainted. I had been taken to a medical room. She and my father had not answered when the nurse called. Grandpa Harold had come. I was home now and I was okay. There was a long silence on her end of the phone. Then she said, "Oh my goodness, Emily, why didn't you call me yourself?" And something shifted in me at that question. Something that had been soft and apologetic and accommodating for years went firm and quiet. I said, "Mom, I was unconscious. I could not call anyone. The nurse called the emergency contacts on my form and you did not answer." She said, "Well, we had the game, we had our phones in our bags, it was a loud venue." And I said, "I know." And I let th. At sit there without filling it with reassurance or comfort, or the customary "Emily will make this easier for everyone" response. My father called 20 minutes later. His call was similar. Concern offered after the fact, apology for not answering, quick pivot to how great Marcus had done, gentle implication that I should not have scared them like this, as if fainting at my own graduation had been a choice I made to be inconvenient. I listened. I said very little. When the call ended, I sat on the edge of my second-hand mattress in my small apartment, and looked at the wall and understood, perhaps for the first time with complete clarity, that I had spent my entire life being the person in this family who was safe to disappoint. That clarity was painful, but it was also, in its own way, like finally turning on a light in a room you had been navigating in the dark for years. Suddenly, you could see the shape of everything. The days that followed were a mixture of quiet and noise. Several of my classmates had seen what happened at graduation and reached out to check on me, which was kind. Priya came over the next morning with a care package and sat with me for hours. My grandfather called every day for a week, always brief, always practical, always ending the call with the same words. Just checking in, Em, you call me if you need anything. My parents called less frequently. When they did call, the conversations had the same slightly defensive quality, a feeling that they wanted me to close the subject by forgiving them easily so everyone could move on comfortably. I was not ready to move on. I had taken a week off work after graduation to rest, apply to jobs, and decompress. I used part of that week to do something I had not allowed myself to do before. I sat down and I wrote out, in a plain notebook, everything I remembered about the pattern. Not to assign blame in a dramatic way. Simply to see it clearly, to put the shape of it on paper where I could look at it without the habit of excusing and softening and minimizing that I always did inside my head. I wrote about the scholarship ceremony they had missed. I wrote about the business competition. I wrote about the birthday I had spent alone in my sophomore year because there was a tournament that weekend. I wrote about the time I had gotten a terrible flu my junior year and spent 4 days alone in my apartment because I had not wanted to worry anyone, because I had trained myself to be undemanding even when I was genuinely suffering. I wrote about the Christmas I had worked a hotel shift while Marcus opened a new gaming setup that my parents had bought him. I wrote about all of it, quietly, alone, in plain handwriting, and when I finished, I sat back and looked at what I had written and understood that I had not been reading too much into things. The pattern was real. It had been real for a long time. I had just been very good at not looking at it directly. What happened in the 2 weeks, after graduation, changed the shape of everything. My grandfather called me one Thursday morning with a different tone than usual. He asked if I could come to his house that weekend, not for anything urgent, but because he had some things he wanted to talk through with me, and he preferred to do it in person. I drove out on Saturday morning. He had coffee ready and the kitchen table clear, which in his house meant he was treating the visit as something important. Harold was a simple and organized man. A clear table meant a serious conversation. He told me that he had been thinking about his estate for some time. He was 68 and in decent health, but he had watched his own brother die without a will 3 years earlier, and it had created chaos and hurt that the family was still working through. He did not want that for his family. He had been meeting with a lawyer named Robert Finch quietly for several months, working through the details. He had a home, a paid-off house on about 2 acres of land that his wife, my grandmother who had died when I was 12, had helped him buy and maintain. He had modest savings, a small investment account, and some physical assets including tools, a truck, and some equipment from a woodworking hobby he had kept up for 30 years. He told me he had made his decisions and had signed the paperwork already. He wanted me to know directly, from him, before anything formal was communicated. He was leaving the house and the land to me. Not split between family members, not passed to my father first, not held in a complicated trust. To me, directly. He said he had thought about it for a long time and it was not a sudden decision. He said he had watched me work for things my entire life without asking for help and without receiving the support he felt I should have had, and that he wanted to do something real and concrete that would give me a foundation. He said the house was paid off and in good condition and that the land alone had significant value, given how the area had developed. He said he was not doing it to punish anyone. He was doing it because it was right. I sat across from him at that clear kitchen table, and I did not know what to say. I had not expected anything like this. I had never asked him for anything. I had never hinted that I wanted something from him. I had visited him because I loved him, because he was honest and steady and present in ways that the rest of my family frequently was not. I told him I was overwhelmed and grateful, and that I was not sure I deserved it. He told me that sentence was exactly why he was giving it to me, because someone who thinks they do not deserve basic care and recognition has usually been told that too many times by people who should have known better. He told me that my father knew nothing about it yet. He said Robert Finch had advised him to wait until the estate documents were fully finalized before informing anyone else, which would happen through formal letter within about 3 weeks. He asked me to respect that timeline, to keep it between us, and to trust him. I said I would. I meant it. The 3 weeks that followed were the quietest and strangest of my life. I had started a new job at an accounting firm called Radner and Bloom, an entry-level position, but a solid one with a good team and real growth potential. I was trying to get my feet under me professionally, manage the emotional aftermath of graduation, and hold this enormous piece of information quietly inside me while my regular family life continued on its usual surface. Marcus had made the regional qualifier team and was now in heavy practice for the next round of competition. My parents were deep in that world. Conversations with them were brief, mostly about Marcus, occasionally a polite question about how the new job was going, and then back to Marcus. I answered their questions simply and kept my emotional cards close. The formal letter from Robert Finch's office arrived on a Tuesday, sent simultaneously to my father as Harold's son and to me as the named primary beneficiary. My grandfather called me that morning, before the mail had even arrived, to tell me the letters were going out that day. He sounded steady but tired. He said, "Whatever happens next, you remember what we talked about and you hold your ground." I said I would. My father called me at 4 in the afternoon. He did not begin with hello. He began with, "Emily, I need you to explain to me what this letter means." I told him it meant what it said. He asked me if I had known about this. I told him that Grandpa Harold had told me a few weeks prior. Yes. The silence on his end of the line was very long. When he spoke again, his voice had taken on a careful, controlled quality that I recognized as the version of his anger that he deployed when he was trying to appear calm. He said he thought we should all sit down together as a family and discuss this, because this was not the kind of decision that should be made without a family conversation. I said that Grandpa Harold was the only one whose opinion legally mattered when it came to his own estate, and that he had clearly already had those conversations with the appropriate people. My father said, "Emily, that is not how family works." And I said, as calmly as I had ever said anything, "Then we may have a different idea of how family works." He called back twice that evening. I did not answer. He called my grandfather, who I know because Harold called me afterward to say that the conversation had been difficult, but that he had said what he needed to say and that his decisions would not be changing. My father then drove to my grandfather's house that same evening. I know because my grandfather told me the next morning. He said my father had arrived upset and had stayed for over an hour trying to argue, reason, guilt, and pressure him into revising the will. My grandfather said he had listened to everything my father said, and then said that his answer was the same as it had been before my father arrived. My mother called me the next morning. Her approach was softer than my father's, which was her usual style. She did not confront directly. She came in at an angle, with sadness and confusion rather than anger. She said she did not understand what had happened, that she felt like she had missed something, that she did not know Emily had been going through a difficult time. She said she wished I had come to them and talked about how I was feeling instead of letting it get to this point. The implication was gentle but clear. If this outcome was happening, it was partly because I had not communicated well enough. The shape of the blame was shifting toward me without her ever quite saying it outright. I recognized the move. I had seen it my whole life, just never named it so clearly before. I said, "Mom, I have tried to share things with you for years. I am glad you want to talk now, but I think you should speak to Grandpa Harold Dyer. CTLY, because he made this decision, not me." She was quiet for a moment, and then she said she was worried about my grandfather's mental state. She said that a man his age making a major decision to exclude his own son was concerning and perhaps reflected outside influence or confusion. I felt a cold clarity move through me at that. She was laying the groundwork to challenge the will on grounds of mental competency. I said, very carefully, that my grandfather was one of the sharpest and most clear-thinking people I had ever known, and that he had worked with a professional attorney over several months to make these decisions. I said I would appreciate it if she would be careful about what she suggested publicly. Then I ended the call. I called Robert Finch's office the next morning. I introduced myself and explained that I was the named beneficiary in Harold Calloway's estate documents and that I was beginning to receive pressure from family members and wanted to understand what, if anything, I should be aware of. Robert Finch was professional and clear. He confirmed that Harold Calloway had been fully competent and engaged throughout their work together, that the documents were properly signed and witnessed, and that he had worked with families long enough to know that estate decisions sometimes generated pressure on beneficiaries. He advised me to document any concerning communications I received and to contact his office if anyone threatened legal action. He also suggested I speak with an independent attorney of my own, just to have someone in my corner who was not acting in dual capacity. I thanked him and followed his advice within 2 days, finding a young attorney named Clara Webb through a referral from my coworker at Radnor and Bloom, who had gone through something similar with her own family. Clara was organized and direct, which I appreciated. She reviewed the copies of the estate documents that Robert Finch's office had provided and confirmed that they were solid. She told me that challenges to wills based on mental incompetency were legally difficult and generally unsuccessful when the person had worked with an attorney over a sustained period, had given consistent instructions, and had no documented medical history of cognitive impairment. Harold had none of those vulnerabilities. Clara said the most likely scenario was family pressure and negotiation rather than a genuine legal challenge, and that my best tool was patience and documentation. I went home that evening and sat quietly in my small apartment, thinking about all of it. I was not celebrating. I was not gloating. I was not even particularly focused on the house and land and what they might mean for my future, though I understood clearly that they represented a kind of security I had never had. I was thinking mostly about my grandfather sitting across from me at his clear kitchen table, telling me he had watched me work for everything without asking for help, and that he wanted to do something real and concrete for me. I thought about him driving 40 minutes in garden clothes to hold my hand on the floor of a medical room while my parents sat in a baseball stadium watching my brother field practice pitches. I thought about the pattern I had written in the notebook, all those years of being the dependable one, the fine one, the one who could be counted on not to make things difficult. The family noise continued for several weeks. My father made 2 more attempts to speak with Harold, both of which Harold recounted to me calmly. He was not changing his mind. His patience with the pressure was quiet and complete, the same steadiness he had always had, and I found myself admiring him in a new way, not just as a grandfather, but as a person who understood that integrity meant staying consistent even when it was uncomfortable. My mother tried a different angle with me, suggesting that perhaps Harold could be encouraged to set up a shared family trust instead, and that everyone could benefit, and that surely I did not want to create this kind of division in the family. I told her that I was not creating anything. I was simply receiving what someone who loved me had chosen to give. Then my brother called. Marcus and I had always had a relationship that was complicated in the way that sibling relationships are when one child has been consistently centered and the other has not. He was not cruel. He had never been a bully. He was simply someone who had grown up with gravity pointing toward him and had not thought hard about what that meant for the people who were on the outside of that gravity. He called me on a weekday evening, and his opening was not what I expected. He did not begin with anger or accusation. He said, I don't really understand everything that's happening, but Mom and Dad are really stressed, and I wanted to call and check in with you directly. I appreciated the directness. I told him I was doing okay and that the situatio N was straightforward legally. He said he had heard about the will. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Can I be honest with you about something?" And I said yes. He said, "I think I've kind of known for a while that things weren't always fair. Between you and me, I mean, the way things were in the house." He paused. He said I never said anything because I didn't know what to say, and honestly I didn't want to make things weird. But I wanted to say it now. It wasn't fair. I don't know if that helps anything. It was the most honest thing anyone in my family had said to me in a very long time. I was not ready to have a complete reconciliation with Marcus, but that call mattered. I told him I appreciated him saying it. I told him it did help a little to hear it named. He said he hoped things could get easier eventually. I said I hoped so too. My grandfather's health took a minor turn in the second month after the will letters went out. Nothing life-threatening, but he developed a respiratory infection that required a course of antibiotics and some rest, and his doctor had asked him to limit strenuous activity for a few weeks. I drove to his house every weekend during that period. I brought him food, helped with light chores, sat with him in the evenings, and watched the nature documentaries he loved. He was slower and quieter during those weeks, but mentally entirely sharp. He made dry observations about the family situation that made me laugh more than once. He called it the great estate drama with an expression of mild amusement that suggested he had expected something like it and was not remotely rattled. During one of those weekend visits, he asked me what I planned to do with the house eventually. I told him I had not decided yet. He nodded. He said he was not asking because he needed a plan. He was asking because he wanted me to know that whatever I chose to do with it was entirely mine to decide. Sell it, live in it, rent it, let it sit, and think about it for a year. He said the point had never been the house specifically. The point had been to give me something solid and real that could not be taken back. He said I had spent enough of my life building things for other people without a foundation of my own. He said he was old and he had made mistakes, and one of the ones he regretted was not stepping in sooner when he saw how things worked in my father's house. He said he could not fix the past, but he could do this one thing, and he was glad he had done it. I held his hand, sitting in his living room with the television on low in the background, and I told him he was the most important person in my family and the truest one. He said that was a very kind thing to say. And then he said, "Stop being sentimental. Emily, there's a very good program about pelicans coming on in 4 minutes," and I laughed in the realest way I had laughed in months. My parents' approach evolved as the weeks went on, and they realized that the direct pressure was not producing results. My father shifted from confrontation to a kind of wounded dignity, presenting himself as a father who had been blindsided and hurt by his own father's decision, and who simply did not understand what he had done to deserve this outcome. There was something almost sincere in it, which made it more complicated to witness. I did not think my father was a bad person. I thought he was a person who had made choices for so long without examining them that he had lost the ability to see their cost. He had chosen Marcus's baseball game over my graduation, and he had genuinely believed, in the way that people believe things that are convenient to believe, that I would understand. He had provided a comfortable home and had worked hard, and he had told himself that was enough. That the particular ways in which he had been consistently unavailable for me, emotionally and physically, were not actually significant because Emily was capable and Emily was strong and Emily would be fine. Being confronted with evidence that Emily was not fine, had not been fine, and that his own father had seen this clearly enough to make a permanent legal and financial decision about it, was information my father did not know how to hold. I felt some compassion for that. But compassion and consequence are not opposites. You can feel sorry for someone's confusion while still declining to fix it for them. My mother made one more attempt at a direct emotional conversation about 3 months after graduation. She asked if we could meet for lunch, just the two of us, and I agreed. We met at a small restaurant midway between her town and mine. She arrived looking tired. We ordered. She talked about Marcus for the first 5 minutes, which was habit, and then seemed to catch herself and pivot. She said she had been doing a lot of thinking. She said she did not think she had been a bad mother. She said she had loved me and that she had tried. She said she knew she had focused a lot of energy on Mark. Us because he needed more guidance, more pushing, more external support for his goals than I had ever seemed to need. She said she had taken my competence for granted, and she could see now that might have hurt me even if that had never been her intention. That was the closest my mother had ever come to an actual apology. It was not complete. It still framed things in terms of what she had intended rather than what I had experienced. But it was real in its way. I told her I heard her. I told her I believed she had not meant to hurt me. I told her that the impact was what it was regardless of intent, and that I had spent a very long time being the version of myself that required nothing so that everyone else could be comfortable, and that I was not going to do that anymore. I told her I was willing to have a different kind of relationship with her going forward if she was willing to actually show up for it. But that I would not pretend the pattern had not existed, and I would not make it easy for everyone to move on without anyone actually naming what had happened. She cried a little. I did not rush to comfort her. That was new too, letting someone else sit in their feeling without immediately absorbing it to make it easier for them. We finished the meal. She hugged me at the cars. The hug lasted longer than our hugs usually did. Things were not resolved, but they were different, and different was something. My grandfather recovered from his respiratory infection and was back in his garden by mid-autumn. He called me one morning to report that his tomatoes had been exceptional that year, which he presented as a personal triumph of great significance. I drove out the following Saturday, and we ate lunch in his kitchen with the back door open to the garden and the smell of earth and late sun coming in through the screen. He seemed like himself again. Solid. Present. Quietly happy in the way that people are when their life is small and intentional, and full of the right things. He asked me how things were going with my parents. I told him truthfully. Progress, but slow. He nodded. He said that was about what he had expected. He said my father was a proud man, and proud men moved slowly toward honest reckoning, but they did sometimes get there if they were given enough space and enough evidence that it was safe to be honest. He said he would not tell me whether to reconcile or how far to open the door. He said that was mine to decide and only mine, and that whatever I decided, he trusted my judgment. I thought about that phrase. He trusted my judgment, not in the performative way people sometimes say it, as a hollow compliment or a way of sidestepping real support. He said it the way he said everything, directly, already certain of it, not needing me to prove it. I had been working at Radnor and Bloom for 4 months by then. The work was demanding, but genuinely engaging. My supervisor, a woman named Patricia who had been in accounting for over 20 years, had noticed my focus early and given me more responsibility than most entry-level staff received. I was grateful for work that asked something real of me. It was grounding during a period that was emotionally complicated. I was building something that was mine, not just surviving, not just being the dependable one in someone else's story. I was starting to be the lead character in my own. The most significant conversation with my father happened in late autumn, about 5 months after graduation. He called one evening and asked if he could come by my apartment. Not a family gathering, not with my mother, not with any agenda except to talk. I said yes, because I believed in giving real chances when they were presented with some humility. He arrived on a Sunday afternoon. He had brought coffee from the place I used to go to in high school, which meant he remembered something specific about me, and that small gesture was not nothing. We sat at my small kitchen table, not unlike the way I had sat with his father at Harold's kitchen table 5 months earlier. He held his coffee with both hands, and he looked at the table more than he looked at me, which for my father was a form of vulnerability. He said he had been thinking since the letter about things he had not thought about carefully enough for a long time. He said he had told himself for years that providing financially and practically for the family was the main job, and that because I was doing so well independently, his energy was better focused on Marcus, who needed more direction. He said he had told himself I was proud and independent, and that I preferred to handle things alone. He said when he really looked at it honestly, he was not sure he had asked me what I preferred. He had assumed. He looked up at me then. He said, I should have been at your graduation. I should have been at the other things. I know that, I'm sorry. It was a real apology, not layered with conditions, not immediately followed by a pivot to his good intentions or his workload or Marcus's needs. Just the words, sitting there, direct and plain and a little late and also real. I sat with it. I did not rush to release him from it, but I also did not punish him for finally offering it. I told him I heard him. I told him that I had needed him in ways I had never said clearly enough, and that was on me too, because I had trained everyone including myself to believe that I was fine without them. I told him that I wanted a different relationship going forward. One where I was actually part of the family, rather than the reliable background member who could be counted on to not need anything. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Dad always said you were the one who was paying attention. He said it for years, and I never really understood what he meant. He said he understands now. I did not know exactly what to do with that. I just nodded and held my coffee and let the afternoon be what it was, imperfect, late, real. The house situation resolved itself practically over the following months. My grandfather remained in his home, which was always the plan while he was living. The estate documents simply established that the property would come to me when the time arrived. I visited him regularly. We settled into an easy rhythm of Saturday lunches and phone calls and his reports on the garden and the pelican documentaries. He was happy. That mattered to me more than anything else about the situation. My relationship with my parents has been slowly and genuinely rebuilding. It is not what it would have been if certain things had never happened, but perhaps it is more honest than it ever was before. My mother has made real efforts to ask about my life in ways that are actually curious rather than obligatory. My father has shown up twice for things that mattered to me since that Sunday conversation, once for a small work event where I was recognized for a project contribution, and once for my birthday dinner in January. Both times he was present and quiet and there. It was not a dramatic transformation. It was a beginning. Marcus and I have talked more in the past year than in the previous 5 years combined. He is 20 years old and genuinely talented at baseball and genuinely beginning, I think, to wonder about the shape of the world beyond his immediate achievement. He has started asking me questions about things. About work, about money, about how I managed college financially, about what I actually think, and not just what I will say to smooth something over. I answer honestly. It is the only way I know how to have a real relationship with anyone now. What I want to say, as I look back across the distance of this year, is that the turning point was not actually the will or the house or any of the practical things that shifted. The turning point was lying on the floor of that graduation venue in my gown, coming back to consciousness in a medical room, looking at the door and finding only my grandfather there. That moment, as painful and disorienting as it was, had done something necessary. It had made it impossible for me to keep pretending I was fine. It had removed the ability to say it was no big deal and I did not need anything and I would be okay on my own. Because I had learned that day, concretely and bodily, that I was not always okay on my own. And that it mattered deeply whether the people who loved you showed up. My grandfather showed up. He drove in garden clothes in the middle of his own day because someone he loved needed someone, and he was the someone who was available and he came. That is the simplest form of love I have ever witnessed. Not the decorative kind, not the kind that posts things or makes speeches or promises that it will definitely be there next time. The kind that answers on the second ring and asks for the address and drives. I have tried to carry that lesson into every relationship I now choose to invest in. I ask less often whether I am being too demanding, and more often whether the people around me show up when it actually counts. I have learned that being strong does not mean never needing anything. It means being honest about what you need and being selective about who you trust to meet you there. I have learned that protecting the peace at all costs is not actually peace. It is just a very quiet form of loss that accumulates over time until something collapses. I have learned that the moment you stop pretending you are fine is the moment real things can finally begin. My grandfather turned 69 in the spring. I drove to his house with a chocolate cake and a card, and we sat in his garden in the late afternoon light, eating cake on the patio with the birds making noise in the trees beyond the fence, and he said it was the best birthday he had had in years, which, coming from Harold Calloway, who was not a man of exaggeration, felt like exactly what it was. A true thing said directly by someone who meant it. I am 23 now. I have a job I am good at and growing better at. I have an apartment that is mine, small but clean and made into a real place by things I have chosen carefully. I have a grandfather who answers on the second ring. I have a brother who is starting to pay attention. I have parents who are doing the slow and imperfect work of rearranging their understanding of me. I have a friend in Priya who showed up crying in the venue and came over the next morning with a care package and has never once required me to be fine when I was not. I have not yet decided what to do with the house on the 2 acres. I have time. My grandfather is in no hurry. And for the first time in my life, I find that I am comfortable with not having the plan fully made, comfortable with sitting in possibility, comfortable with not rushing to resolve things for the comfort of everyone around me. That might be the quietest and most important change of all. I do not think of what happened as revenge. I have heard that word applied to this story by people who know parts of it, and I understand why it fits certain elements. But what actually happened did not feel like revenge. It felt like truth doing what truth does when you finally stop blocking the door. It moves in. It rearranges things. It shows people exactly what they built, including all the parts they had preferred not to look at. My grandfather made a free and considered and legal decision with his own property based on what he had witnessed over many years. My parents were confronted with the consequences of their pattern in a way that was undeniable. I stopped being fine out loud. All of that was truth. The outcome was what truth produces when it has been kept waiting long enough. The empty seats at my graduation were real. The cold floor of the medical room was real. My grandfather's garden boots were real, and his hand holding mine was real, and his question asking only for my address before he drove was real. The notebook full of small moments I had written and finally allowed myself to see was real. The lunch with my mother where she sat across from me, and I did not rush to fix her discomfort was real. The Sunday afternoon with my father and the coffee from the old place, and the apology that came without conditions was real. All of it was real, and all of it mattered, and none of it required me to be anyone other than exactly who I am. That is what I have finally, actually, genuinely learned to believe. Before you go, I want to ask you something real. If you have ever been the one in your family who was counted on to handle everything quietly, to need nothing, to understand when you were skipped, to be fine, I want you to sit with one question. Has being fine kept you safe, or has it just kept everyone else comfortable? Emily spent years answering that question the wrong way. If her story reached something in you, tell me in the comments. Tell me about the moment you stopped pretending. Tell me about the person who showed up when the ones who were supposed to did not. And if you are still in the middle of that story, still waiting, still carrying it quietly, this video was made for you. You do not have to be fine today.